So, guys, I'll be reacting to the fallout of World War II video. Okay, so yeah, here we go.
The average lifespan of an American is 80 years, and an 80-year-old today was 10 when World War II ended, 4 when it began. A soldier who saw battle
So today was 10 when it started. Jeez, 1940.
would have to be in his late 80s at least today.
So when did they start recruiting for at least? So they are talking about 19-year-olds in war, right? 19, um, even below that, 18-year-olds in war in 1940.
Generals, political leaders, the decision makers of the war, few are still with us. And over the past few decades, we've seen authors and filmmakers rush to capture stories from survivors before this connection of memory is lost.
That is something we overlook, especially when we go around in our world. Like, it is just one generation that went through so much, and they have so much wisdom and, especially knowledge that we fail to see in today's world. We generally consider war is bad, some wars are good, some wars are bad. But obviously, when it comes to that situation, we have very little experience about it. But these people who live through it would have a lot of wisdom on it. It's good that we have YouTube and artists and historians who collect this information and keep it going, keep the story alive. I think it's very important that history stays alive through generations and it doesn't get twisted around, because that is what the powerful people do. They like to twist it around and use it for their advantage. History is written by the victor like this. So
This project is not about individual war stories, and it's not about survivors. We're going to tally up the tens of millions of people whose lives are cut short by the war, and see how these numbers stack up to other wars in history, including trends in recent conflicts. We'll be counting soldiers and civilians separately. Each of these figures represents 1,000 people who died. Civilians were of all walks of life, whereas military deaths were almost entirely men. The average age was about 23.
Jace, imagining like from the grand perspective of thing, looking from out, each figure is 1,000, and all these guys could have been friends, could have experienced life till they're 89, could have gone through heartbreak, getting back up in life, finding their way in life, healing from wounds, making new friends, finding love again, starting a family, having children. It's sad to think it just got short in.
In most battles, for every 1,000 soldiers killed, there are more than 1,000 who are injured. The word casualty can be confusing because in military speak, it often includes both deaths and injuries, and anything else that takes a soldier out of service. Here, we're just counting the deaths, and we'll begin with American soldiers. Over 400,000 died. Most of the deaths occurred in the European theater, fighting the Nazis. And about a quarter were in the Pacific, fighting the Japanese. When you put them on the timeline, you see that casualties were the heaviest at the end of the war. The war began on September 1st, 1939. But the US wasn't willing to join the fight until Pearl Harbor, 2 years.
Yeah. And I also think like every country recognized that US could change the trajectory of the war. And for some reason, they were like hoping it joins the Allied. I think it's the Allied, right? Yeah. But probably most of the countries that were fighting the Axis by themselves, especially Europe. And Europe was pretty happy when Pearl Harbor happened, I believe, because yeah, despite the casualty, that means they will be entering the war.
in. The deaths increased drastically on D-Day, when the Allies invaded Normandy. One of the most tragic moments of the war was on D-Day at Omaha Beach, where 2,500 Americans fell. So
On D-Day, one day, jeez, 2,500.
the same number of US soldiers died on this single beach landing as the entire 13 years of the recent war in Afghanistan. The bloodiest battle in the Pacific was Okinawa, which lasted 82 days, during which 12,500 Americans died. About 5,000 of these deaths were at sea from kamikaze attacks.
Jeez. I think it's, in a sense, it is lucky that the people were lucky to die in the kamikaze attacks fighting the Japanese rather than on the ground. If you are caught prisoner there, then it's like the worst case scenario. The Japanese were like very violent.
Now let's look at some other countries, starting with Europe. Germany started World War II when it invaded Poland. Poland ultimately lost 200,000 soldiers in the war. Most died after the invasion while the country was occupied by Germany and the Soviet Union. Germany, meanwhile, lost just 16,000 in the invasion of Poland.
I don't know how Germany managed that. Was it superiority or more precision in strategy or something? I would like to know, or surprise, or was it just an advantage of the situation? Was Poland going through a hard time economically? Don't know.
The Nazis went on to invade and conquer other countries, including Denmark, Belgium, the Netherlands, France, Greece, and Yugoslavia. France surrendered, but after losing 92,000 soldiers in the Battle of France. Over 200,000 ultimately fell, which includes deaths in POW camps, French colonies, and other fighting. Yugoslavia suffered almost 500,000 military deaths. The initial invasion brought relatively few casualties on both sides. But the deaths mounted under Nazi occupation due to guerrilla fighting, civil conflict, and mass executions.
Jeez. It was almost like they were.
The Nazi invasions were swift, with relatively few German losses. Even the Nazi commanders expressed surprise at their success. And then we have the United Kingdom and the United States, who were not invaded but took the fight to the Nazis. Britain lost about the same number of soldiers as the US, which includes the British colonies. Germany lost about 500,000 soldiers fighting the US and Britain.
I think, yeah, even from India, soldiers were sent to fight for UK and Africa and all their colonies, yeah.
In what is known as the Western Front, which took place in France and Belgium. But most Nazi soldiers died in the Eastern Front, Germany's unsuccessful invasion of the Soviet Union. The numbers are staggering. The most famous battle of the Eastern Front, and perhaps the turning point of the European war, was Stalingrad. The German Sixth Army successfully took Stalingrad, but then got surrounded by the Soviets and cut off from food and ammunition. 500,000 Nazis would ultimately die in Stalingrad. Another 100,000 were taken prisoner, of which 6,000 would ever return. POWs had a low survival rate throughout World War II, and it was particularly grim in the East. When you include these POWs, roughly the same number of Germans.
It's just sad, man, how much violence we are ready to inflict on each other. Just throwing out stats of people. Look at these thoughts and ideas, killing for thoughts and ideas, and just stats, like each figure represents 1,000 lives. Imagine all the experiences in life they missed out on. It's just sad.
As all the Western Front fighting against France, the UK, and the US. And though Stalingrad was a victory for the Soviets, they suffered almost twice as many losses as Germany. The Soviet Union would eventually defeat the once unstoppable German army, killing
That is true. I think the end of the war came because the Soviets beat the Germans, you know. I think that was, people talk about the influence of United States, and it did influence a lot, but I think this was the most important part, you know. The Soviets were the ones who crushed them, to
0.3 million
overwhelm them with just, look at all the lives they spent.
Nazi soldiers. But winning the war came at a cost. $8.7 million is the official tally by the Russian military, a hotly disputed number. Some studies have calculated as many as 14 million dead. To complete the count
Is it just military deaths, I think?
of European military deaths, we need to add German deaths from other fronts, including the North and Africa, as well as deaths from other Axis powers allied with the Nazis, Hungary, Romania, and Italy. When you put these European military deaths on the timeline, it looks like this. You can now interact with the chart to learn more. Pause the narration if you would like more time. And now we switch to civilian deaths in Europe.
You know, it's awesome. It's sad to see, but I think visit Fallen IO. I think it's good that they have websites and they have like this beautiful video that they made. It tells us who we were, you know, as humans, how politics and ideals can lead to extremism and show how violent we can be. And once the violence starts, we can see how hard it is for us to stop. And we can literally see that it was not just pretty far in the past. It was just 60 years ago. It was one generation ago. And look at life today. Like, it totally, I feel like what a number of people that were born after the war were like totally disconnected from it. Many of us are totally disconnected from it, like a bad memory. You know what I mean? Yeah, true, man. If this whole thing was on history at school, I will never miss. You shouldn't, man. It should be taught, you know. It keeps us connected, I believe, to some extent. As when we look at somebody who hurt us, then it just humbles us to, like, you know, they're also human. It makes us human, more. It reminds us that we have to be more loving in this world, you know. Seeing all this sadness and all this viciousness, you know, makes us want to be more kind. I don't know. Like, you know, like avenge the darkness with good, you know, of our own humanity.
6 million Jewish people were killed in the Holocaust. If you separate this by country, you see that about half, 2.7 million, were Polish. 700,000 were Soviets, followed by Hungary and 17 other countries.
No, man.
Broken down another way, about half of the 6 million
Nukes will cause unnecessary damage. But nukes are the ones that protect lots of stuff. smaller countries today, I think, and alliances.
were killed in the concentration camps. Broken down another way, about half of the 6 million were killed in the concentration camps. Over 1 million died in Auschwitz. Most were killed in the gas chambers. Others died from starvation, exhaustion, disease, and other forms of execution. The second most deadly camp was Treblinka, which was exclusively an extermination camp, set up to look like a train station. Mobile killing groups killed 1.4 million Jews.
And most of the Germans, the ones who were fighting never knew that atrocities like this was happening, because I think it was like specific groups, tasks assigned to kill the Jews, and while the others were fighting the war, they were like far away from home, and they never knew it. And it's just sad and evil too.
Like with the gas chambers, men were killed first to reduce the risk of revolt. The Holocaust also includes non-Jewish deaths. Between 130,000 to 500,000 Roma, then called Gypsies, were killed.
Yeah, I've heard of the gypsies. Yeah, there is like, even in the comics, they did a lot of experiments, with the soldiers and all. It became very, like, they got corrupted by power, Even, as the war went on, they got more and more evil. Like, scientists performing experiments on humans, trying to create super soldiers, and they ended up with what, meth, right? I think meth was the one they used for the blitzkrieg's. They used to fight for like 2-3 days, like violently. I'm assuming like the non-stop, and they used to overwhelm the like normally everybody needed rest for like after fighting for like 2 or 3 days, I think, but they would just keep going on because they took meth, and they would over when the others opponents were looking for food and supplies and everything else, these guys were like wired out of their minds, just pushing forward and then resting for a long time once they captured. And I think that's where the blitzkrieg was.
The numbers are disputed. About 250,000 people with disabilities were killed. Homosexuals, Catholics, and other groups were also exterminated, but their numbers were relatively small. Some historians say that other civilian deaths should go under the label of Holocaust. About 2 million non-Jewish Poles were killed under German occupation, some of which were sent to the gas chambers at Auschwitz. When you combine civilian and military deaths, over 16% of the total Polish population died in World War II, which is the highest percentage of any country.
Jeez, man, Poland lost 16% of its population.
Not the highest in total death count. The Soviet Union again tops that list, losing at least as many civilians as it did soldiers. Somewhere between 10.
Yeah, soldiers. I think they were like so hungry that they started feeding on dead humans. I've heard of stories like that being common especially in the winter, I guess. I'm not sure, in Soviets during the wars. Like the entire villages got cut off from supplies, and they started eating their dead children and family members. And they were even selling their children for money, food, I think, next time. I'm not sure. Sad.
And 20 million. A particularly dark moment for the Soviet Union was the siege of Leningrad, now St. Petersburg. German forces surrounded Leningrad before civilians could be evacuated. Supplies, including food, were cut off for 2.5 years.
2.5 years.
1.5 million people died as a result, mostly from starvation, mostly civilians. Stalin's cruelty towards his own people is partly responsible for these numbers. He often didn't allow civilians to evacuate from cities, thinking it would cause the soldiers protecting them to fight harder. About 1 million Soviets died in Stalin's own labor camps called the
What if you are risking the lives of your people? What kind of ruler are you? Why are you even there? You know, I've heard us the story about his wife also. Like every after his wife died, like the humanity that remained in him was gone with the death of his wife.
Gulag. Just about every country suffered civilian losses, especially countries who were invaded. While many died as a result of so-called collateral damage, the biggest numbers occurred when it was no accident. Civilians were exterminated, purposely fired upon or bombed, used as human shields, or intentionally deprived of food. The intentional killing of civilians was done by most warring parties, including the United Kingdom and the United States.
That is sad. They both killed. In the end, evil like had to be overcome with evil. It's sad, like it almost as if evil had to be overcome with more evil. It's very sad. And it just beats the purpose. They couldn't just. They had to be mean back. It's very hard to justify either side. Like hard to say that they had to do it, else it wouldn't have gone well or something. But it's just sad. I don't know what to say.
The United Kingdom was spared of a land invasion, but still lost 60,000 civilians, largely from German air raids or blitzes, often directed at civilian population centers. The UK did the same to German cities at a much greater magnitude, causing about 10 times the number of deaths. But most German civilian deaths came from the ground at the late stage of the war. When the Nazi regime collapsed, civilians living in occupied regions had to desperately flee from the advancing Soviet army. Rapes were widespread, and death estimates ranged from 600,000 to 3 million.
See, the hate and the vile evil, the bruise, like vengeance, and all that. Yeah, depressing stuff.
Let's step back and see where we are with the totals. We just counted about 20 million civilian deaths in Europe. If you add this to the European military deaths we already covered, it brings us to over 40 million. Then we have the Asian theater. Here we see the vast majority of military deaths in Asia came from China and Japan. On the civilian side, about 6 million deaths from China, Indonesia, Korea, Indochina, and the Philippines can be attributed to Japanese war crimes, which are sometimes compared to the Nazi atrocities due to the sheer scale of the cruelty. China had the second highest death count after the Soviet Union. And like the Soviets, the Chinese government demonstrated a stunning willingness to sacrifice its own people. Chinese nationalists opened the dike at the Yellow River, hoping the flood would halt the Japanese advance. 500,000 Chinese civilians or more were killed, which is 2 or 3 times the number who died in all countries in the 2004 Asian tsunamis.
Can you imagine that? In 2004 Asian tsunamis. Like, look at the scale.
But the invasion of China only cost Japan 200,000 soldiers. Most were killed fighting the US and allies in the Pacific War. A significant portion of Japanese civilian deaths were caused by American firebombing and the 2 nuclear attacks. Contrary to official US statements, these airstrikes were directed at civilian populations, not military targets. When you add all the deaths outside Europe, it brings us to a grand total of 70 million for the war, give or take depending on who's counting and what civilian deaths get included. More people died in World War II than in any other war in history. For comparison, here are 20 or so of the very worst wars and atrocities we have on record.
And the worst, like literally, are Mao and Stalin. And others are okay. Atlantic slave trade, American Indians, Russian troubles. It will fall off Ming Dynasty, Napoleon, Taiping Republic, World War II.
Some of these are more of atrocities than wars, but we've seen how that distinction can get blurred. Some of these spanned across centuries. World War II had the highest body count, and it all happened in just 6 years. The world's population has grown significantly since the earliest atrocities on this list. If we want to compare them in terms of what percentage of the world died, we can adjust the chart to look like this. This rough approximation tells us there may have been more devastating wars before World War II, proportionally speaking.
Yeah, so that's what I thought too. But I think you
When
can't
we turn to
quantify it like that, you know. When we take proportions into consideration, we're just turning human lives into fodder, cattle. What I'm saying, but I think it's just a number of lives lost. Each soul is like very important, but you can't have communism in a grand scale. Obviously, to consider the impact it has on civilizations and humanity, not humanity, but civilizations and all that you can do. I think in the end, it's the number of souls you lost.
war conflicts. It's hard to say anything that isn't controversial. But the data shows something quite extraordinary has been happening. In 1989, John Gaddis coined the phrase the long peace to identify the absence of conflict between the nuclear powers during the Cold War. 25 years later, the Cold War is over, and the term is still being used, although its meaning may have shifted. European countries have not fought each other, except for this 10-day war in 1956 when the Soviet Union invaded Hungary. When we look at European wars before World War II, it looks like this. They tend to be more frequent as you go back, though smaller in scale. And the largest 44 economies of the world have not battled each
When you look at this is why history is important. It's very important because we live in a small part of history and we get a lot of data from what we see and live through from the news, you know, and people being violent and wars everywhere, that everything is bad and negative and world is going. But if you look back 100 years, you will have perspective of how far we've come as a civilization. Though we're going down the wrong path, you can't get overwhelmed with negativity, you know. You should have that hope that, you know, there was a system to some extent that we were a part of that maintained peace for a long time. And we have to place our hopes in still calling out that system. Though it's failing miserably today, we still have to keep doing that as one people, I think, you know, keep calling out the system that ensured peace for all this while and figuring out where the issues are coming. Obviously, we know the kind of issue where it is coming from, which countries are responsible, but we have to get to the core of them. You know, it's a slow process, but I think it's happening. I don't know to what extent it's going to be effective. We should have hope because we've had peace and people now are starting to look to the past and all that because given the current scenarios, I think there will be an improvement in, you know, the knowledge shared about wars and about history and how today it relates to the situations we have today and the approach as we people we have to look forward to or take. I think it will influence a lot like information today because we have social media and people making beautiful videos like this. And it's even in this fast-paced world, it's easy to get a perspective on, you know, time and how we have improved and why it is all crumbling like really fast in the past few years. Like how far has it? How long back has was the issue started? Like who is the core issue? Like what can be done? You know, whom to appeal to, etc.
other since World War II. Rich countries have fought poorer countries, like the US versus Iraq. but rich countries have not fought other rich countries. Such a period of peace between the so-called great powers hasn't been seen since the Roman Empire.
Yeah, because we have the threat of nuclear weapons, right? Like it's there is no, like every country can be almost the, if you take the top countries, both countries can destroy each other instantly. You know what I mean? Like there is no escape. It doesn't mean if you, like if it gets to that point, both countries can destroy each other, and there is nothing you can do to stop that. And no matter how big your military is, you can't. Nukes are nukes. Like if you have like 200 nukes, you can destroy the other country, depending on the size. That's a done game. So, but we are playing around. We're getting close, but it only depends. Like for example, China doesn't care about its population. I think, to be honest, it would be ready to sacrifice a large part of its population, like they did in the Yellow River, and so would the United States. But I don't think they realize that. They think they're like well protected, but when you look at who is actually in power, and when time comes, you only then you realize where the governments place people in their priority list and who the government is really run by. Yeah, that is sad, but that is true.
To many, peace is too strong of a word. Wars have occurred since World War II, and they can be grouped into these four categories. We don't see colonial wars anymore. We've already noted that interstate wars between rich countries have not occurred at all, and here we see wars involving smaller economies have tapered off. That leaves civil wars of two types, with and without foreign intervention. And this is what these battle deaths look like alongside of World War
See,
II.
like
More
perspective, we get the perspective, right? Like with or without foreign invention, what alliances mean, two alliances influences, what does terrorism have an impact on this, all this, like you get a really good picture. It's just not simply, it's easy to get wound up in this sadness of everything, that every killing that is going on around. When you look at this, you get to feel like something can be done, like something can be figured out.
people died fighting in World War II than in all the wars since. And again, we can't forget about world population, which has almost tripled since World War II. If we scale these numbers to show deaths in proportion to world population, showing the likelihood that a person on Earth dies in battle, the downward trend becomes even more pronounced. Now, this isn't to infer anything about why this trend is occurring. That's a discussion for another day. You can now interact with this chart to explore what conflicts are behind the total.
The downward trend is only because there are more people. It doesn't matter, like it matters that people will lose.
Now, bear in mind, we're just looking at battle deaths here, not civilian deaths.
I hope nobody finds happiness in this downward trend of deaths in comparison to the population.
But those two are in decline. Peace is a difficult thing to measure. It's a bit like counting the people who didn't die in wars that never happened. We give such importance to the word peace, but we don't.
This is how much we care. This is how much, when you look at peace, look at this chart, this is how much we care. Even if it could be as less as 1% of the people died throughout the past 200 centuries, we would still be fighting for peace. That is how much truly it is ingrained in our hearts to love and to find peace. We can call this peace, all this white place. Oh, look, we've been peace. We have had peace. It's not too bad. But why do we feel sad when people die and wars happen? I think even this is extreme, the number of deaths we've had. And even if it was like 1%, the number of deaths we've had, we would still be sad about it. And I think, to be honest, only if we are still sad about that 1% of human population that died in wars, only then that only speaks to the more humanity in this, It only speaks to the love and desire for peace, you must.
Tend to notice it when it occurs, or report on it. Sometimes it takes reminding ourselves of how terrible war once was to see the peace that has been growing around us.
That is also true.
Of course, this trend may not continue, and it's not clear how looking at these charts can help us make the right decisions to ensure that it does. But the longer the long peace grows, the more significant it becomes.
That is true. The longer the peace is, the longer we can get to know each other, and the longer we can give the next generation an idea of what life should be like, or what life should move towards, not chaos, peace, so that they have an idea and they don't get normalized by the violence around the world, by violence and war and all vitriol.
So if watching the news doesn't make us feel hopeful about where things are heading, watching the numbers might.
Wonderfully said. Neil Halloran. That's awesome. A one-man effort. Awesome. Music and sound by Andy Dollarson. Two-man
If you'd like to
effort.
support this project and encourage new episodes, please follow us using one of the options below. And consider paying the suggested ticket price for today's show.
All supporters.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was awesome. Thank you for such effort and detail. Thank you for being reminding us that we have to be more like what God intended us to be like. It's also sad and awesome.